Welcome all to the Amateur's Guide to Shogi, and welcome back to another recap. Today we've got the first game in the 2021 Oui Title Match, played between the title holder, Sota Fujii, who won it last year in 2020, and yes, I double-checked this time, and the challenger, Masayuki Toyoshima. So we've got Sota Fujii playing black in this game, and Masayuki Toyoshima playing white. And this was not a particularly long game. It was a little bit exciting. There was a few provocative moves and a little bit of a mystery towards the end. So I hope you enjoy. And let's just get going. So it's just before we start, it's 8 hours on the clock each. So it's longer than the Kisei title match. And let's just get started. So Sota Fujii starts, obviously, is black, and we see a pretty standard, like we've seen this many times if you watch the Kisei recaps, this exact opening, it's almost identical up until this point, just standard rook pawn opening, climbing silver sort of idea, and bring the gold up and bring the king up to one of these two squares. Very standard in professional shogi these days. The only difference in this game is that they all decided to bring the edge pawns to the party right away. And the reason for that is that both of them want to do an edge attack, which we'll see in a short while. Okay, so Fujii obviously is trying to have a pawn exchange here, which he gets. The rook is kicked back, and of course he protects against his opponent doing the same thing by putting the rook here instead of back on its home square. So if you were to carelessly, sorry, I should be hiding this, carelessly just try and make a pawn exchange yourself, you would either just lose a pawn or a full rook, depending on how careless you were. So don't sack a rook. Bad plan. Okay, so he defends against this pawn exchange. Now, of course, Toyoshima opens up his bishop's diagonal, and here we see a bit of a provocative move from Sota Fujii, a very strange move, in my opinion. He puts the rook across one square to attack this pawn, which is quite funny to me. Because essentially what he's saying is like, yeah, I'm going to move my static rook off its file, one square, for the sole purpose of attacking this free pawn. And it's provocative because he's basically telling his opponent, what are you going to do about it? Literally, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to defend it? Or are you just going to let me have it? It's quite the funny move. And of course, yeah, it is a free pawn. It is hanging. And the only neat way to defend it is to lift this gold, which is actually what white does here. But of course, this is a bit awkward because, well, one, you've just cut off that bishop's diagonal that you literally opened 2 seconds ago. And, the other reason is that, okay, well, judging by this opening strategy and putting the king here, chances that he wants to castle anytime soon are pretty slim, but if he wanted to castle, this gold would be very awkwardly positioned. And so Sota Fujii basically forces him to lift the gold for the sole purpose of protecting a pawn, which you never want to do, and putting it in an awkward position. So, bit of a funny move there. Anyway, Fujii opens up his own bishop and puts pressure on this gold. But of course, this allows Toyoshima to finally get that pawn exchange because, of course, the rook's line of sight is cut off. Rook is kicked back, and now the rook laterally defends this pawn, this weak pawn, so that actually frees up the gold to do whatever it wants now. And so Sota Fujii just decides, well, my job here is done. Let's just move the rook back to where it is supposed to be, and Toyoshima does the same with his gold. So ultimately, at the end of the day, nothing came out of it, but it was a bit of a funny exchange. So we get a pawn exchange, not kicking the rook back because you would have lost this side pawn if you hadn't moved this pawn here. Rook's line of sight is cut off, which is why Toyoshima decided to go for the pawn exchange there. And once again, Fujii targets this weak pawn because at the end of the day, it's still free. And this time, Toyoshima just decides to give it to him, which he does take it. And can see, finally, this edge attack that I was talking about in the beginning. So both players want to do an edge attack. Neither player wants to defend against each other's edge attack. And they both kind of just ignore each other, as you will see. And Sota uses a striking pawn here to bring that lance one step forward so that he can take 2 pawns for a lance, actually giving Toyoshima 6 pawns in his hand, for 2 pawns and a lance. And also, of course, allowing his, this battery with the lance and the rook on this edge file, and allowing the rook potentially in to promote to this square and wreak havoc as a dragon. But Toyoshima is unfazed, and he just continues with his own edge attack. Of course, this is taken, but it's exactly the same strategy. Striking pawn backed up by the lance and the rook is taken. But Toyoshima opts here for a different strategy. Instead of just taking this and copying what his opponent is doing, instead drops a pawn behind into into the enemy camp, a dangling pawn ready to promote. And Fujii capitalizes on this by just snipping that free lance. But of course, allowing this talking promotion, which is very dangerous, close to the king and threatening lots of pieces. So at this point, I will throw open the first little quiz of the day. How do you, or rather, not how do you defend the bishop, because you can't really defend the bishop, where do you move the bishop to? You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 options. Which square do you put it on? I will give you a few seconds, or you can pause the video and try and figure it out. Okay, hopefully you came up with an answer. It is, of course, a trick question because Sota Fujii did not defend the bishop at all, and instead locked it in, essentially sentencing it to death. If you came up with like this or this, those are probably the two best choices if you are trying to save the bishop. Here and here are also fine. It is still under attack by the rook, but of course it is defended. But also, just Fujii is just doesn't care. He just locks his bishop in, sentences it to die. But of course, why? Would any sane person take the free bishop for a pawn when they could instead leave it sitting there, trapped for the next 15 moves? Yes, yeah, you heard that right. Toyoshima does not take this bishop for 15 moves. And I guess in his defense, look, it ain't going anywhere anytime soon. So there's no real rush here. So instead, he kicks the rook out, and Fujii offers a rook exchange, and they exchange rooks. And at this moment in time, they are about... I think they're a little over halfway through their allotted time. So I think they've got each... And the timing is a pretty... consistent throughout this entire game. They're both on about 3.5, 3 3/4 hours left on the clock at this point. Okay, and we continue with an exchange of minor pieces here, as you will see, or would be an exchange of minor pieces if Fujii decided to take this. Knight, which he threatened with the pawn, but he decides not to, and instead sort of forks these 2 pieces here. Not quite a fork because your rook would be taken, but he's going to try and gang up on this silver and destroy what little of a castle there is, because these 2 haphazardly placed generals do not make a castle easy pickings for Sota Fujii, and so he's trying to gang up on this silver here, and you will eventually see him trade off a bishop for the 2 generals, which is usually a good trade. Rook, of course, does keep an eye on this pawn, which, of course, prompts Toyoshima to finally take the bishop. Of course, you cannot let this token just sit here. It's just too dangerous. So Fujii finally takes it and gets rid of this token. Okay, at this point in time, I'd like to ask you, who is better in this position, and why? I'll give you a few seconds, or you can pause the video. Now, I guess we could ask the computer, but ignoring the computer for now, because computers are dumb, my vote is actually on white here. Because it's slight at the moment, it is slight, but his castle, in inverted commas, it's not exactly much of a castle, is slightly stronger. It's harder, right? This castle over here is very weak from the side, which you will see Toyoshima. That is how he goes about the endgame here. But it is still quite equal. But yeah, because this king is a little bit safer from both sides, I would say that white is slightly better. But it is still anyone's game at this point. So we see, of course, Toyoshima targeting these weak generals on the side by utilizing this knight that Fujii just never took for some reason, and allowing him to sink a bishop right into his opponent's camp once this silver moved. So he obviously defends this square from becoming a problem. Of course, if you did not do that, say you just did something stupid, this is, well, that's mate. Don't hang mate. So instead, he obviously blocks that. But this, of course, allows a rook drop also in his camp. So you can see how sort of removing the defender here with the aid of this knight, with one drop, he was able to completely expose the weaknesses in Sota Fujii's camp and establish two major pieces right in his face. And this is a completely unprotected gold. So of course that is blocked by the lance, which simultaneously defends the silver, and the gold defends the lance. But Toyoshima decides to trade off after this move, decides to trade off the bishop for a general. For two lances. And as you will see in a moment, because this has to be blocked, it comes with check. That is actually a fork, and there is no way to defend both. So he actually trades off the bishop for two lances and a free silver, which is obviously a very nice trade. If you can trade off one piece for three, almost always going to be a good idea. So in this position, there is a nasty-looking dragon breathing fire down Sota Fujii's neck. But this is a slow move in terms of endgame speed. So, of course, Sota Fujii seizes the initiative. Finally, this bishop drop happens, and Toyoshima plays another slow move, just moving the dragon down one so that he can attack this hanging gold. But, of course, Sota Fujii does not wait for him to do that. He, of course, not sacks the bishop. He trades the bishop off for the two generals with a check. Whoops. That skipped ahead a few moves. I don't know what happened. With a check. King moves to the side, and he gives another check with the silver, forcing the king to the side again. He does not want the king to keep running, so he stops giving checks. He needs more pieces in his hand, so he takes this knight, which he can then use in his attack. But of course, this, once again, is a slow move. Slow moves in the endgame, never a good idea. They allow your opponent to seize the initiative, which Toyoshima does. Now, in this position, you can obviously tell that it looks very, very dangerous for Sota Fujii. There's a dragon and a knight teaming up. There's only two generals here, which are pretty badly placed. And he's got two generals and a bishop and two lances in his hand. You'll be right for thinking that this is a mate, because it is. After this move here, this is a threat mate. If you haven't heard the term before, if you're new here, a threat mate is basically a position where if you do nothing, you're in a forced mate. And it is, in fact, a very simple threat mate, which I will show you now. Say you do something like a nothing move, you just move the dragon for some reason. It starts from this sack, only move is to take. Gold drop here, only move is to go here. You sack the knight, only move is to take. Bishop drop prevents the king from escaping out this way, and from here the king has three squares to go to, but all of them end up being mate. If you go to here or here, I'll show you just here, for example, it's just gold on the head, protected by the bishop, and the gold obviously protects the bishop, and same if the king goes here. So that is mate. You can survive one move longer if you instead choose to go here. Then you've got your choice of two different mating options. Actually, it could be more than that, but there are two that I found, which are, there's this one, silver defended by this bishop, and regardless of which square you go to, let's say you go here, once again, gold on the head, mate. And the other one, is once you go here, you can drop the silver here, which is, in my opinion, a little bit fancier because that is a silver sack. You can also go here, but it's the same result. Silver sack, and of course, once again, goal on the head mate. So this is a force mate. It's very simple in the grand scheme of things because up until that last move, it was just every move was a forced move. And in fact, it is so simple that even I, Mr. Amateur, who bumbles his way through Tsume problems, was able to find this on my own without any computer assistance or hints or anything. And it didn't even take me that long. So it is in the grand scheme of things, it is an incredibly simple mate. Sota Fujii is a master of Tsume. Is arguably, in fact, I don't think anyone would argue otherwise. I would say that he is the best Tsume Shogi player in the world, possibly ever. And he's won the Tsume competition, I think 3 years running, with multiple instances of 100 points out of 100. He is a master of Tsume. So the point is, there's absolutely no way that he didn't know that this was a threat mate. It's too simple. Too simple. He of course knew that this was a threat mate, which begs the question: why did he give this little check and then resign? This is the mystery at the end of the game that I was talking about in the beginning. He gives this final check, and once Toyoshima moves his king out of the way, Sota Fujii resigns. I don't know. You might very reasonably say, well, Mr. Amateur, clearly Sota Fujii thought his opponent was also in a mate, and then realized after playing this move that he wasn't actually in a mate. And to that I say, that seems highly unlikely because this sequence of moves, starting from this bishop drop and taking and all of these checks, taking the knight and giving this check, all of these moves were played within minutes. Sota Fujii blitzed out all of these moves very, very quickly. And it's not like he was in blitz mode at this point. He had 1 hour and 40 minutes left on the clock, about the same as his opponent. And yet he blitzed out all of these moves and then just resigned. If he thought that this was a mate, he would have presumably spent, a lot of his remaining time. He has 1 hour and 40 minutes to calculate all of this. He would have spent all of that time determining whether or not it was actually a mate. And if it wasn't, he would have defended. Because this is a threat mate, but it is not a brink mate. You can defend, it's still nasty, but you can defend this. You can drop a gold or even, probably even here or here, right? So it's nasty, but it's not brinkmate. And for those of you who don't know, brinkmate is a threat mate that is impossible to stop. But it's not quite checkmate because you still have the opportunity to checkmate your opponent before they checkmate you. So just because it is brinkmate, a mate that you can't get out of, doesn't mean that it's game over necessarily. So this is not a brinkmate. So why he spent so little time throwing out these moves and then resigning instead of trying to calculate, spending 1 hour of his time calculating some mate and ultimately deciding to defend, I have no idea why he didn't do that. I don't pretend to know what on earth is going through Sota Fujii's mind at any given moment, but I'm just, relaying it to all of you as I see it and as it happened. So yes, Sota Fujii resigns and loses the first game in the 2021 Oui Title Match. So Masayuki Toyoshima goes up 1-0 as the challenger going into the second game. So I hope you all enjoyed that recap. And I hope you all will stick with me as I continue to cover the rest of the 2021 Oui Title Match games, because it was a very fantastic match between two fantastic players. And if you saw my Kisei Title Match Game 3 video, I did spoil who ends up winning this match. And of course, if you don't want to be spoiled now, if you don't want to be spoiled, leave now. But of course, Sota Fujii went on to win this match 4-1. So he subsequently won the next 4 games to win the match. So a massive comeback from after this first game here. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope to see you all next time. Bye bye.